He didn't ask. He barked. "Step out. Now, before I make you." No warning. No reason. Just flashing lights. And a black woman behind the wheel. Nice car? Must be stolen. At night? Must be suspicious. Her skin? Already a verdict. But what Officer Halvorsen didn't know, what his partner didn't dare say, and what that radio check was about to reveal, was one thing. The woman he just threatened at gunpoint was his boss, Danielle R. Monroe, Chief of Police. What state are you watching this from? Could this happen where you live? If this is your first time here, welcome to Mr. 7 Stories. Hit like, subscribe. Now, let's see what happened that night. Night fell over Redefines Springs like a heavy quilt draped across the aging southern town, where time still seemed stuck somewhere in the 1960s. Along the deserted stretch known as Old Cedar Route, Highway 62, weak, scattered streetlights barely pushed back the thick darkness that blanketed everything. The wind hissed through rows of pine trees, carrying the scent of damp soil and scorched grass left behind by last week's rain. A gray-black Chevrolet Traverse rolled slowly down the slick road, its engine soft as a sigh. Behind the wheel sat Danielle R. Monroe, 42 years old, just leaving a closed-door meeting with the mayor about internal police reform. All she wanted now was to get home, pour a cup of hot tea, and let her mind rest. But in Redefines Springs, even the night refused to be kind to a black woman, even if that woman was the newly appointed police chief. Headlights flared up behind her. Then came the flashing red and blue, swirling like a familiar nightmare. Danielle didn't sigh, didn't curse. She simply eased the car to the right shoulder, placed both hands calmly on the steering wheel, exactly how she had learned, had taught, and had watched others do so many times in training. Stay calm. No sudden moves. Don't argue. Don't do anything they might call a threat. And yet, even when you do everything right, the shadow of bias still creeps over the car like a fog. 2 officers stepped out of the Redefines Springs Police Division patrol car. The doors slammed shut, echoing through the quiet night. Brent Halvorsen, 39, took the lead. Broad-shouldered, cold eyes. His hand hovered near his holster. Beside him walked Kyle Merritt, young, hesitant, but mirroring every step of his hardened partner. Kyle had been on the force just over a year. Transferred from a neighboring town after graduating from the multi-ethnic recruitment program. The same program Danielle had once delivered the keynote for just last year. He recognized her, or thought he did. But in law enforcement, doubting a superior could be seen as betrayal. And to Halvorsen, any sign of softness was weakness. Undisciplined, Danielle watched them through the rearview mirror. Her face was unreadable, but inside, a silent wave surged. She had known this could happen, even with the highest badge, even after the standing ovation in the city council room. When red and blue lights flash in your mirror, you're still just a black woman driving a nice car where she doesn't belong. "Ma'am, step out of the vehicle." Halvorsen's voice sliced through the night, sharp as a razor blade. No greeting, no explanation, just a command. Danielle's grip on the wheel tightened until her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath. She had known prejudice, but this still stung. Because this time, she wasn't just a woman being profiled. She was the head of this very force. And they had no idea. She opened the door and stepped out into the pale amber glow of the street lamp. No resistance. No bowing of the head. No avoiding their gaze. Her low-heeled shoes clicked gently on the cold, damp asphalt. Her eyes locked with Halvorsen's. "Is there a problem, officer?" Her voice, low, steady, didn't tremble. Halvorsen didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned the Traverse, as if searching for a reason to justify himself. Kyle stood behind him, hand resting near his belt, avoiding eye contact. In the flickering lights, Kyle glanced at Danielle, then back at Halvorsen. A part of him wanted to ask, "Are you sure about this?" But the habit of obedience locked the words in his throat. In his chest, his heart beat fast. Not out of fear, but from a nameless unease. In Redefines Springs, tonight wasn't just another traffic stop. This was a collision between past and present. A black woman now stood face to face with the very kind of power that had scarred generations. But this time, the real power was standing with her, and they were about to find out. In a most unexpected way, Brent Halvorsen held out his hand. His voice clanked like metal on metal. License and registration. No please. No may I. Nothing but bare authority and a dry, floating suspicion that hung in the air like dust. Danielle R. Monroe opened her wallet. She pulled out the documents slowly, steadying her hands. She had trained more officers than Halvorsen could name. She had learned how to stare down those who disrespected her and still keep her spine straight. But that didn't numb the familiar sting in her chest. She handed him the papers with one hand. No words, no apology, no explanation. She didn't know any. Halvorsen snatched them like he feared she might change her mind. He didn't even look at her face. He turned away, pulled out his radio, mumbled something no one could make out, then headed back toward the patrol car with Kyle Merritt. The flashing lights reflected off their shoulders, red and blue slashes slicing through the darkness. Danielle stood alone at the roadside, hands lowered by her sides, her eyes locked on their every move through the rearview mirror. They'd run the check. They'd get confused, and they'd be furious when they realized how far they'd gone, without even knowing who they were dealing with. From inside the patrol unit, the radio crackled low. Halvorsen squinted at the screen. Kyle leaned in, frowning, trying to get a better look. Danielle recognized that expression. That look, the one that said, "A black woman driving a $40,000 car at night? Something's not right." How could they possibly imagine that they had just pulled over their own superior officer? Not because she hid it, but because their bias simply wouldn't allow them to imagine that the new police chief of Ravenhun Springs could be a black woman who came from East Line, a neighborhood long dismissed as the projects. Danielle stayed silent. No introduction, no challenge. She wanted to see just how far they'd take this, and how far they'd take her, if they still believed they were in control. Through the windshield, she saw Halvorsen say something to Kyle. Then both of them turned back toward her, and this time they looked longer, closer, no longer with contempt, now with doubt, and something like disbelief. Something in the paperwork had rattled them. The name Danielle R. Monroe was no longer just a stranger in the dark, but they still didn't know everything. Not yet. Halvorsen stepped out of the vehicle again, his face clouded like a storm about to break. Kyle followed, eyes still lowered. Brent walked a few steps forward, stopped just in front of Danielle. "Ma'am," he said, "please step away from the vehicle." This time, there was a please, but the tone was still hard. Danielle took a deep breath. She knew what was coming, and it was nothing new. The theater of racial bias was underway again. Only now, the stage was Ravenhun Springs, and she was the only one holding the real script. Night wind slipped beneath the collar of Danielle R. Monroe's blazer, sending a sharp chill along the back of her neck. She stood still at the roadside. The flashing lights from the patrol car painted her bronze-still face in waves of red and blue. She had once stood under bright lights at City Hall during her swearing-in ceremony. But tonight, these lights meant something else. Suspicion, interrogation, and all aimed directly at the person who represented the law itself. Brent Halvorsen stood about 2 paces from her. His eyes skimmed the documents again. Valid license. Clean registration. Nothing wrong with the plates. Brand new Chevrolet Traverse. Spotless interior. No smell of smoke. No scratches. Nothing. Everything was perfect. And it was that very perfection that made Halvorsen uneasy. Kyle Merritt whispered, "You sure about this? Everything checks out. I even ran the insurance." Halvorsen scowled. A woman, black, alone, driving a high-end vehicle, on Old Cedar, at this hour. He glanced at the Traverse. Doesn't add up. Danielle heard every word. They didn't need to speak louder. She'd heard that logic her whole life. Doesn't add up, because she didn't match the image of poverty they had locked in their minds. "We received a report of suspicious activity in the area," Halvorsen said. His voice was level. "Cold. I need to search your vehicle." Danielle held his gaze calm. "Do you have a warrant, officer?" Halvorsen paused, then smirked. "With probable cause, I don't need one." His eyes fixed on her, tried to intimidate. Danielle drew a breath. Didn't blink. Well then, Brent Halvorsen. She dropped each word with deliberate weight. What exactly are you suspicious of? The perfume I'm wearing? Or the color of my car not matching the color of my skin? Kyle swallowed. Halvorsen flushed. He stepped back, then forward again, as if her presence alone disrupted the rules he thought were written in stone. Step aside. Hands on the hood. Danielle didn't move. She'd faced armed robbers, had a gun pressed to her forehead. But this, being seen as a suspect by someone wearing her same badge, crushed her chest in a way she couldn't shake. You have no right to search my vehicle without a warrant. And you know that, she said, voice steady low but firm. Halvorsen clenched his fists, hesitated. Behind him, Kyle started to feel the wrongness in the air. Too quiet, too clean. This woman, she didn't fit any of the usual profiles they were used to handling. Kyle slowly pulled out his phone, turned on the camera, not to betray his partner, but in case things went too far. Halvorsen stepped forward, his eyes burning. You're obstructing a lawful order. Then he swung his arm, intending to force Danielle to turn around. But just then, she stepped back, half a step. Her eyes never left his. You're picking the wrong target, and I promise, you won't like what happens next. If someone else had said that, Halvorsen might have brushed it off. But from Danielle, something about her voice made his heart skip. Put your hands on the hood. Now. His voice was tight, his hand already resting on his holster. Danielle slowly raised her arms, not in surrender, but as a witness to a system unmasking itself. You are being detained for investigation, Halvorsen declared. Click. The cuffs snapped shut, cold as a sentence without a trial. Danielle didn't scream, didn't resist. She simply closed her eyes. For just 1 second. 1 second for her father, dragged from his car in the middle of the night in 1982 over a broken taillight. 1 second for the scholarship kids she mentored, the ones who always asked her, Ms. Monroe, why do they hate us when we haven't done anything wrong? And now it was her, the police chief of Ravenun Springs, handcuffed on the very ground she was sworn to protect. No warrant, no cause, nothing but a bias so deep it blinded everything else. From afar, the sound of an engine approached, headlights coming up fast on Old Cedar Road. Halvorsen didn't notice, but Kyle did, because he recognized the vehicle. That wasn't just a civilian. It was a black SUV belonging to the Internal Oversight Response Unit, only deployed for special cases. Danielle lifted her face from the cold metal hood. The new light skimmed across her cheek, and in that brief moment, Kyle Merritt saw what Halvorsen still couldn't. They had just handcuffed the one woman, who could fire them both, with a single phone call. As the handcuffs clicked shut, it felt like the entire sky over Ravenun Springs got darker. Danielle R. Monroe stood there, cheek pressed to freezing steel, wrists locked in place, not because she had committed any crime, but because one man couldn't stand the weight of power, wrapped in skin unlike his own. Brent Halvorsen crossed that line without the faintest hint of regret. He stood beside her, hands on hips, eyes gleaming with pride, as if he'd just subdued a dangerous threat. Obstruction of lawful command. Threatening an officer. You know exactly what you just did, don't you? Danielle turned her face to the side. Her hair tousled gently in the night breeze. Her voice came low, steady, but rang like a bell from an old church tower. I know exactly what I didn't do, and that is what's going to keep you up at night. Officer Halvorsen. Behind them, Kyle Merritt still had the phone in his jacket pocket. He didn't dare lift it, but he didn't dare turn it off, either. Inside him now was a quiet war. Loyalty to his partner, or loyalty to justice. The lights from the SUV grew closer. Danielle recognized it instantly. A black Chevy Suburban from the Inspector General's Rapid Response Team. Someone had called it in. Or maybe they were already on the way for something else. But one thing was certain. They would know who she was. And yet, Halvorsen continued, still drunk on control, still playing out the final act of a ridiculous, dangerous performance. We have the right to search the vehicle, even detain someone if we see signs of danger. Halvorsen declared loudly, not looking at Danielle, but toward Kyle. as if trying to school the younger officer into following his outdated definition of doing things right. Danielle shivered, not from the cold, but from a deep, compressed fury, not just for herself, but for all the people who had been insulted, beaten, turned into shadows under flashing patrol lights, and whose names no one ever bothered to learn. Police chief or not, Halvorsen said, someone like you doesn't get to be above the law. The words left his mouth just as a second SUV pulled up. Headlights off. Doors clicked open. Out stepped a tall man. Gray and black hair, broad shoulders, his captain's uniform gleaming in the light from the patrol cruiser. It was Captain Wesley Drummond, a veteran commander, the same man who had shaken Danielle's hand at her swearing-in ceremony at City Hall. Kyle whispered, "Oh no." Drummond strode forward quickly, his eyes sweeping over the scene. Danielle, in handcuffs, still calm, but lips slightly pale. Halvorsen turned, and in a flash, his expression froze. "Brent," Drummond barked. "What the hell is happening here?" Halvorsen's throat tightened. He struggled to keep his voice even. "We were conducting a routine stop. This woman is Chief Monroe, Brent." Drummond's voice sliced through clenched teeth. "She was sworn in by the town council less than 48 hours ago." The air on Old Cedar Road thickened like spilled ink. Halvorsen took a small step back. Danielle lifted her head, her eyes no longer defiant. They were the eyes of someone who had just won. Without raising her voice, "Take the cuffs off. Now." Drummond's command struck like thunder in the night. Not loud, not shouted, but so full of authority. It locked Halvorsen in place like a nail to wood. We were just... Did you not hear me?" Drummond stepped closer, his stare drilling into Halvorsen's chest. "That was an order." At the roadside, Danielle R. Monroe stood still, hands cuffed behind her back, her eyes never leaving Halvorsen, not for 1 second. In that choking silence, she felt the chill on her wrists begin to fade, not because the night had warmed, but because the balance of power was beginning to shift. Halvorsen reluctantly reached into his pocket for the key, his fingers trembling. It took him 3 seconds to fit the key into the lock, 2 more to open the cuffs. But to Danielle, those 5 seconds stretched like a full lesson, one the entire Raventon Springs Police Division would do well to memorize. She stepped back half a pace, rubbed her left wrist, not for comfort, but to feel the mark left behind, not just from the metal, but from a system that had long believed the law only applied to certain people. Drummond turned to Kyle, who still hadn't said a word, but the phone in his pocket was still recording, silently documenting everything. A live witness, a sharp blade, hovering over Halvorsen's career. "Do you even know what you just did?" Drummond turned back to Halvorsen. "You just handcuffed your direct superior, the person sworn in by the mayor less than 2 days ago, with no legal justification whatsoever." Halvorsen swallowed hard. His eyes darted away. Sweat glistened along his temple. Danielle, now fully upright, took 1 step forward. Her voice wasn't angry, but cold and sharp, like a scalpel. "You don't see that I'm not the problem. The problem is, even with every document in order, even with nothing done wrong, you still saw me as dangerous, because I didn't match your picture of what harmless looks like." The words hit the air like a boulder dropped into a still lake. "If I weren't the police chief, what would have happened tonight, Brent?" No one answered, and no one had to, because everyone knew the answer. Far down the road, another vehicle approached. This time, a recording van from Internal Affairs Media. Maybe they were here to document a routine night patrol. Maybe a GPS trigger had sent them. But to Halvorsen, those headlights looked like the final nail on the lid of a coffin slowly being sealed. Danielle turned to Drummond. "And this," she said, raising the wrist where the cuffs had been, "we'll handle in the office. Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Drummond gave a silent nod. Halvorsen stood frozen, like a statue, just realizing it no longer belonged. The air on Old Cedar Route stood still, as Danielle turned slowly toward Halvorsen. She walked forward, not fast, but with a gravity that made every eye lock on her, like a verdict was about to be read. "I am Chief Monroe," she said, her voice ringing clear. each word spaced like a gavel strike on concrete. The woman you handcuffed, the one you called suspicious, and the person you will be answering to at the internal hearing tomorrow morning. Halvorsen stepped back half a pace, but found no escape in the thickening shadows that surrounded him. Merritt stood frozen, hand still resting on the jacket pocket, where his phone had quietly recorded his partner's entire misconduct in front of a superior officer. And then something unexpected happened. From across the street, under the dim glow of a long-closed gas station, a middle-aged man in a baseball cap approached, phone in hand, already live-streaming. It was Leonard Parks, a longtime resident of East Line. The neighborhood, once labeled dangerous, now slowly coming back to life. He had held a banner supporting Monroe at her appointment announcement at City Hall. He had followed her reform campaign from the beginning. Leonard often live-streamed community events, so people could see what's really going on. "Hold up now. Ain't that Ms. Monroe?" he shouted, his voice a mix of excitement and outrage. "The new police chief the whole town's been talking about. You telling me they just cuffed her? Y'all gotta see this." He swung the phone toward Danielle, then panned to Halvorsen and Kyle, as if filming a frontline report. "They arrested her. Right here, on our street. Lord have mercy. If Chief Monroe gets treated like this, what hope does a regular person like us have?" Drummond turned back, his face pulled tight like a stretched wire. "Turn that off. This is an internal incident site." The man raised his hand as if in surrender, but didn't turn off the stream. "It's already live, Captain," he said. "Over 200 people watching, and I'm guessing that number's about to climb fast." Danielle said nothing. She just turned to Halvorsen, her eyes sharper than any shout, the kind of look that didn't need volume to be dangerous. "You didn't just act out of line," she said quietly. "You made the entire town witness it." Halvorsen opened his mouth, as if to push back, but his throat was so dry. Nothing came out. Captain Drummond stepped in, taking control of the moment. "All right, clear the area. Halvorsen, Merritt, off duty, effective immediately. I'll file the report myself, directly to the mayor's office. And Monroe," he paused, voice softening, "on behalf of the department, I'm sorry." Danielle gave a small nod. Not because the apology made things better. She knew a single sorry couldn't wipe away the stains of an entire system, but it could mark a starting point. The live stream continued. Comments flooded in. Hashtag wrongfully cuffed. Black police chief humiliated by her own team. Hashtag justice for Monroe. From one quiet road in the night, a wave had begun, and it wasn't going to stop here. 8 a.m. Office of the Chief, second floor. The brass plaque on the door glinted beneath the hallway lights. Office of the Chief, Danielle R. Monroe. Outside the door, Brent Halvorsen and Kyle Merritt sat stiff on a wooden bench. The coffee in their paper cups had gone cold, but the sweat on their foreheads hadn't dried yet. The whole floor was silent. Everyone knew. No one spoke loudly, but every employee who passed by cast glances like razor blades. The story had already made the local papers. The live stream had hit over 300,000 views overnight. Redefines police cuff their own chief. The headline struck like a slap to the department's pride. Click. The office door opened. A staff officer leaned out. "Chief Monroe will see you now." Brent stepped in first, shoulders stiff as wood, followed by Kyle, his face pale. The office wasn't large, but it was spotless. One wall displayed portraits of former chiefs, all white men, stern-faced, with eyes as cold as their frames. And at the end of the row, a new photo, Danielle R. Monroe, hairpin high, uniform buttoned sharp, gaze level, bowing to no one. She sat behind the desk, hands clasped in front of her. No smile, no frown, just watching. "Sit." The two men sat in the chairs across from her. The chairs were lower than the desk. Intentionally so. Danielle didn't begin with accusations. She opened the meeting with a question so simple, it choked the air out of the room. "What do you think happened last night?" Brent stammered. I followed procedure." "What procedure?" Danielle asked, her gaze still fixed. "What procedure gives you the right to stop someone who broke no law to handcuff them without cause, and to treat a person with nothing but contempt, just because they didn't look safe to you? No one answered. Or do you mean the procedure of habit? A bias? Of unchecked power? Brent lowered his head. Cal still couldn't bring himself to look up. Danielle stood. She walked toward the whiteboard behind her desk, where a single sentence had been written the night before. Why are we afraid of change? She turned around, spoke slowly. I don't need an apology, if it's only given out of fear of losing your job. What I need is acknowledgement that what happened last night was wrong. Not because I'm the police chief, but because I'm a human being. The room went still, like a cathedral holding its breath. Finally, Cal spoke, his voice barely audible. I recorded the incident, not to threaten anyone. I felt it was wrong, and I'll accept the consequences. Danielle gave a single nod. Good. You'll turn over that footage to the Office of Internal Affairs and cooperate fully with the investigation. Then she turned to Brent. And you? This is your last chance to be honest. Brent swallowed. I didn't realize who you were. Exactly, Danielle said, locking eyes with him. And that is the biggest problem of all. The air inside the chief's office grew heavy, as if truth itself had weight. Brent Halvorsen kept his head bowed. Kyle Merritt, though he had admitted his failure, looked no better. The two of them sat like schoolboys called to the front of class to recite their mistakes. Except this wasn't a classroom, and their mistake had been seen by an entire town. Through a live stream, Danielle R. Monroe stood firm, eyes steady. She knew this moment would define her entire term at the Raventon Springs Police Division. If she showed weakness, the old system would swallow every effort at reform. If she came down too hard, she might lose the cooperation she needed to lead forward. But there was one thing. She would never compromise. Principal, Brent Halvorsen, Kyle Merritt. She spoke their names slowly, like delivering a formal indictment. I hereby place both of you on immediate suspension from duty. An internal investigation will be launched under independent oversight, and depending on the outcome, you may never wear this badge again. Brent looked up, eyes red. He didn't protest. He had nothing left to say, only a slow-burning shame, smoldering like coals, quietly consuming the pride of a man who once believed he could never be touched. Danielle continued, her voice low, but clear as a bell. I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing this because of justice. And justice has no skin color. It doesn't care about rank. It doesn't care about tradition. It only asks one thing. Was the action right or wrong? She looked directly at Brent, the same man who once cuffed her like a suspect in the middle of the night. If I hadn't been chief, if I didn't have power and a voice, what would have happened? Her gaze didn't waver. That question shouldn't just make you ashamed. It should make you change. Kyle nodded slowly. Brent stayed silent. Danielle walked toward the door, then paused. You're not the only two who need to hear this, she said, but you're the first two who will face the consequences. Then she opened the door. Light from the hallway spilled in. Officers outside looked up, holding their breath. Danielle didn't say another word, but everyone understood. The old era had just been closed, and the door to something new had been opened. By day's end, the chief's office carried an unusual stillness. Danielle R. Monroe sat alone, behind the old oak desk. The golden light of sunset filtered through the west-facing window, casting a warm orange wash over the stacks of unfinished reports. The morning's hearing had passed. Citizen complaints were now being processed by the book, and the media had shifted tone from outrage headlines to op-eds labeled leadership lessons. But Danielle knew real storms don't vanish overnight. She rose from her chair and walked toward the left wall of the office, where 18 framed portraits lined the space. All past chiefs, all white men, all facing forward, stoic, cold, nearly interchangeable. They belonged to a time when silence was mistaken for stability, and the law was a stick held only by the powerful. And then, in the far corner, hung the newest portrait. Her portrait, hairpin high, uniform crisp, eyes forward, not bowed, not looking away. A black woman who did not belong to that tradition, but was now rewriting it. She smiled gently, not the smile of victory, but the kind that said, "This is only the first day of a long fight." Danielle placed her hand against the frame, then turned and looked around the office. The whiteboard still bore yesterday's words. "Why are we afraid of change?" She picked up a marker and added a second line underneath. "Because it forces us to face the truth." None of the former chiefs had ever been cuffed. None had been disrespected in the street by their own officers. But none of them had ever known what it felt like to represent the unseen and to make them visible, to make them heard, to make them live as full citizens. Danielle R. Monroe was not just the first woman to sit in that chair. She was the first to look the system dead in the eye and say, "We were wrong, and I'm here to fix it." Outside in the hallway, the footsteps of a young female officer echoed softly, stopping just outside the door. A gentle knock. "Chief Monroe, there's a student here from the mentoring program. She says after what happened last night, she wants to become a police officer." Danielle gave a quiet nod. "Send her in." The door opened, and a different kind of future walked in, this time welcomed in Raven Springs. Justice no longer came in just one color. Since that night, it wasn't just one woman who stood up. It was an entire generation being inspired to rise. And they understood something simple. Justice doesn't have to scream. It only has to show up with courage. Thank you for watching this powerful story of Danielle R. Monroe, a black police chief who had the strength to confront injustice from within her own department. If this story moved you, please share it with others who believe that real change begins with courage and integrity. Don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next story. And while you wait, I've handpicked 2 more videos I know you'll love. Until next time, keep believing in justice.